Shortly after this clip was taken, I got violently ill, and it took me half a week to recover. Anyways, we are so back. What's up, everybody? This is gonna sound kind of weird, I guess, but I accidentally managed to listen to the entire Heaven Sent discography. I know you're probably thinking to yourself, Duality, how do you manage to marathon an entire discography by accident? And I'll answer that shortly. First off, I just want to say thank you to everyone's patience. I finally got my studio cast behind me back. For anyone who isn't aware of the studio cast, if you watch my older videos for the past 3 to 4 years, I've been adding a random plushie to my couch behind me every single video. I decided to start it fresh, and I never really publicly acknowledged my studio cast, so we're gonna start from scratch and we'll just see how many plushies I can fit on the couch behind me. We got Jungle Skog and a red panda that I won in the Twitter giveaway like 7 years ago. Anyway, so Heaven Sent. Heaven Sent is a record label that's been on my radar since basically it came out. For those of you who don't know, Heaven Sent is a record label started by the SLANDER duo. They made the label back in 2020 October, and their label tagline is emotional music sent from above. When I was doing research for the video, I found this EDM.fandom description of Heaven Sent, and holy cow, the description is massive. I did the reading though, and it's a lot of adjectives and flashy wording, basically to just say that Heaven Sent is a record label meant for more emotional, melodic music, mostly synth stack, dubstep, future bass, and music of the like. I wasn't really expecting to enjoy listening to the label that much just because I'm not really into this style of dubstep and electronic music. The issue for me when it comes to this like Crybanger adjacent dubstep synth stack music that you often see the likes of AMIDY, Trivecta, SLANDER, and AU5 play is just that while other styles of dubstep I feel like have a lot more characteristics and uniqueness when it comes to the sound design used and just making that style of music your own, making that very emotional music, I feel like treads a very difficult line for me from emotional and empowering and something that makes you feel something, which can very easily become something super cheesy. And when it's something that I've done some introspection on, I can't really pinpoint exactly what that line is or what specifically defines what makes something cheesy and what makes something emotional. So absolutely no disrespect, I think the music released on the record label is very good in quality and production, but as a personal taste of mine, it is hard for me to enjoy the style of music that much. That said, when I started listening to Heaven Sent, I was really expecting it to just basically be a whole record label of that style of music. And even when I was looking at a lot of the descriptions and recaps and reviews of Heaven Sent, it oftentimes was just characterized as the record label that releases melodic dubstep, future bass. What I found is that yes, they do release a lot of melodic dubstep. The music that they release that isn't encapsulated in those main two genres is really interesting and unique, and even has some hidden gems that I wouldn't have expected the likes of Heaven Sent or SLANDER to release. I'm gonna very quickly go back to what I mentioned in the intro. How do I manage to listen to an entire discography by accident? You see, Heaven Sent was put on my radar because a few of the people that I hang out with in the scene have been releasing on there as of late. If you guys haven't heard, Rushdown, the record label known for coining and releasing color bass, recently went on a hiatus. Because of that, a lot of the music that was going to be released on Rushdown ended up being relocated to other record labels or being self-released. And SLANDER actually reached out to Rushdown to release some of those songs that were originally slated to be released on Rushdown. And while I thought to myself, the record label is 3 nearing 4 years old now, it'd probably be a good time to do some quick research and just checking out what is released since then. I'm pretty sure I could make a cool video out of this. I'm keeping this video short because frankly, they haven't even broken 100 songs. And so the reason I accidentally listened to the whole record label as well, had I known the discography was only like 80 songs, I probably would not have set the time to do this video and to listen to the discography. I think the record label is really cool, their marketing is really unique, their whole artistic vision regarding mechas and these large robots in every single cover. The production value is extremely high. They were actually releasing a ton of music videos on their YouTube channel that featured the robots in their album covers. From what I've heard along the grapevine, the artist that is commissioned for these album covers is very expensive. So it's very easy to see that a lot of resources are being put into this label. That said, as a consumer of Heaven Sent's music, it was pretty difficult to go out of my way to listen to all the music. You see, when you go on SoundCloud, the very first thing that I thought was unique was Heaven Sent's official SoundCloud page. Well, first off, it's kind of hard to find because obviously type Heaven Sent and it's nowhere near the top. The reason for that is, well, they don't actually upload any of their songs. Every single song on SoundCloud is uploaded by the original artist that released the song, except for I think one song. So in that regard, I think it's pretty interesting and unique. That said, I feel like the common argument is, well, SoundCloud is not their main platform. And while that could have some merit, some record labels do prefer prioritizing other platforms such as Spotify or Beatport. Heaven Sent doesn't even have a discography Spotify playlist. They have a discography link tree, which I think is very unique. I've never seen anything like it, and my question is, why? If I was an active fan of Heaven Sent, I have to go very much out of my way to compile all the music and to create a listening experience revolving Heaven Sent if I really wanted to. Speaking of which, while I like the idea of the artist having the ownership of the music that they upload onto their own profiles, that does mean that there isn't really much of a quality control in regards to making sure that all the music is actually on SoundCloud, for example. And while in the first year or two, Heaven Sent seemed to have done their due diligence in reposting all of the music that they were releasing, around the beginning of 2022, they just kind of forgot. As for the link tree, it is pretty comprehensive, barring I think maybe 1 or 2 songs that are just missing on there for whatever reason. I'd have to double check, but if there is a song missing, I am going to include it on the screen. Maybe if someone from SLANDER's team is watching, they can fix that. But to loop back around onto the number of songs that have released on the label, like I said, they've only released 79 songs. The discography comes out to 5 hours, 10 minutes, and 3 seconds. And the releases are broken up with 1 song in 2020, 36 songs in 2021, 27 in 2022, 9 in 2023, and 6 songs this year so far. Of the 79 songs, they have been divided into 64 releases, 3 of which are compilations, 7 of them are EPs, 1 remix EP, and 53 singles. One of the things that I think is most interesting about the label is that usually when it comes to these artist-run record labels, oftentimes the artist that has the largest footprint on the label would obviously be the artist that owns the label. In the case of Rushdown, it was Harvey, aka Chime, who had about a third of the releases. On Bitbird, it's the likes of Son Holo, who has the biggest footprint. On Subsidia, it was Excision. You get the point. Where I'm going with this is with my previous marathon videos, which by the way, I've made a playlist for if you guys wanted to see every single marathon I've ever done before. Usually I like to compile all of the releases into statistics, and I like to score artists to see which artists have had the most singles, albums, remixes, etc. SLANDER comes first in none of them. When it comes to featured vocalists, we've had 30 artists feature on a track, but only 2 of them have had more than 1 feature appearance, that being LV and Synkrina. Also, apologies to any names that I destroy. There's only been 1 remix EP on the label, so all of the remixes just come from that 1 remix EP, that being from Skybreak's Unity EP. Albums wise, there have been 7 EPs on the label, and as such, there have been 6 artists that have released said albums. While Skybreak had the 1 EP and the 1 remix EP, AMIDY actually had 2 EPs, that being the Sanctuary and the Wild Winds EP. As for the number of singles on the label, SLANDER comes in a 4-way tie, 3-way tie. Tied with AMIDY and Everen Maxwell, SLANDER has had 6 singles on the label. Coming in first, surprisingly to myself, is Synymata. I've been introduced to Synymata back on Night Mode, and I really liked their Night Mode stuff. Their Heaven Sent stuff I wasn't really too hot on, but I did find at least the SLANDER collab, I really enjoyed it. And as for overall appearances on the label, SLANDER once again comes in a 3-way tie, but for third. Well, you see, while Synymata comes second this time, the new first place frontrunner is the only artist with double-digit appearances, and that's Skybreak. Now, there's definitely a skew of the numbers here. When you release a EP and then a remix EP, your name ends up being the biggest foothold and percentage of the pie on Heaven Sent. That said, even if we were to ignore appearances in its entirety, like I mentioned earlier, SLANDER comes first in none of the metrics, and it kind of brings me back to thinking about, well, why does Heaven Sent exist? What's up? It's me later on in the video. I'm realizing there's something else that I didn't mention, which I did want to mention, and I just thought it was kind of funny, but usually I like to call this pulling an Elysian, and the interesting thing is that Heaven Sent has more artists than they do songs. There have been 91 artists that have released on the record label compared to their 79 songs. That said, I think one of the key things that differentiates Heaven Sent from Elysian, one of the biggest differences with the overflowing artists on Elysian versus the artists here on Heaven Sent, is that Elysian released so many songs from so many different people that resulted in that overflow. Whereas with Heaven Sent, there's a lot of artists that release and have re-released. The reason that quote unquote overflow happens is because a lot of these artists, even if they're collaborating with each other multiple times, such as SLANDER and Synymata, they end up collaborating with additional featured artists that weren't on previous tracks. And similarly, a lot of the artists that have released on the record label a number of times just keep on bringing other collaborators in. So in this case, While there being more artists than music could be a turnoff, or at least in my series of videos, a red flag. In this case, I don't think it's a red flag by any means. And it's pretty cool seeing that range of vocalists that you see on the label. Back in my previous video where I was talking about Subsidia and the Excision project as a whole, one of the things that I mentioned was that Excision had his own label prior, that being Rotten Records. And back then, he used to release a lot of music on said label. And so when he was creating Subsidia, my question is, well, why didn't he just continue Rotten Records? The conclusion that I came to was that Rotten Records had actually stopped releasing, they hadn't released in a while, and was also this weird outlier part of the Excision brand that just didn't quite fit with the whole modern project that he had built up till that point. Now, obviously you could do a makeover of the label, but it seemed he would rather just not touch that, leave it as a relic for its time, and start something new. And starting something new is much cooler and generates a lot more publicity than continuing the same thing you've been doing for the past decade. And Heaven Sent isn't something that I've personally really come to understand still. If those of you who don't know, something that I remembered during this marathon was that SLANDER has another record label, that being Good Vibrations. The main difference with Good Vibrations, though, is that it's actually a collaborative record label with Nightmare. So if I was to imagine myself in SLANDER's shoes, my only guess would be that SLANDER wanted a secondary record label for maybe things that they would have signed, but wasn't approved for Good Vibrations. My understanding is that Good Vibrations is a bit of a harder record label for dubstep, but hybrid trap as well. I think it would have been a bit more interesting and fit more snugly in the whole SLANDER cinematic universe if perhaps Heaven Sent was a sub-label or subsidiary of Good Vibrations, and perhaps it is for all I know. And maybe I do know. You see, Heaven Sent is a subsidiary of Insomniac Music Group. And if you guys don't know, Insomniac has a bit of a foothold in a lot of record labels. Now, I personally don't know what it is that they do that entails their involvement in it, but Good Vibrations is also underneath that same umbrella. And you also have the likes of Bass Rush Records, Hard Records, and Night Mode Records under that same Insomniac umbrella as well. So what is the larger conclusion to be pulled from all of this? I don't really know. You see, obviously there's the record labels that you can think of when it's more geared towards the fan, the music consumer, the music enjoyer, if you will. And Heaven Sent doesn't necessarily seem to be geared towards the consumer, the music listener. I'd personally argue that they could be doing a bit more for the artists that they're releasing. That said, my understanding, at least from some of the people within the industry, is that Heaven Sent is actually doing pretty good for the artist. So maybe from the outside as a listener, while what they do seems a bit counterintuitive at times or lacking, they probably make up for it in other ways, whether it's connections, industry slots, or other things that allow artists to continue to grow, even if as an outsider it doesn't seem like they're doing much. Now, would I recommend marathoning Heaven Sent? It's a yes and a no. My yes is just because it's been around for nearing 4 years now and they only have 84 songs, so it'd be a very easy record label to marathon. That said, personally, instead of listening to it as you go through the discography, I'd actually recommend doing some homework first and adding all of their music on your preferred platform to one playlist and then listening. At least maybe that's what the smarter people do. I personally don't do that. And like I said, their link tree is pretty cohesive and detailed in regards to their whole discography. They are missing a few songs, but you can definitely cross-reference it with some other resources like the EDM fandom page that I mentioned earlier, or the Discogs page. Two more things before I end off this video. I realized I forgot to mention the longest and shortest song, which is something that I like to do. The longest song on the label is Walk on Water by SLANDER, Love Is Gone Part 2, featuring Rory and Dylan Matthew, which comes out to a solid 6 minutes and 23 seconds. Whereas the shortest song on the record label is Cosmo's Sad Machine 927, which comes out at 2 minutes and 22 seconds. That said, if you don't want to marathon the Heaven Sent discography, as you guys already know, I've already done all the listening for you. I've made a little playlist of my personal favorites from the record label, so if you want to take a playlist of my personal favorites and just shuffle that, I'd definitely recommend it. It's going to be linked in the description down below, so feel free to enjoy it. Anyways, that's going to be all from me in this shorter video. And perhaps even let me know if this is a style of video that you guys enjoyed more. I feel like I was a bit more straight to the point with this one. Comment down below what you guys want to see from me next, and I'll see you all next time. Bye.